this collection is indeed going to be a library to go for, and that the level of details with which it treats the topics, and how much work Venerable has put in is amazing. This is a series where you want to go for depth, substance. Not just for easy reading, but substance. Yeah, substance, yes. Okay. Before anyone asks question, I have one question already. Pardon? 4 of them?
44.
Yeah, what are some of those 44 signs, right? Marks of incontrovertible or irreversible bodhisattvas. Obviously, it has to do with obviously, it has to do with the strength of their practice, and their practice, in a broad sense, would constitute method aspect of practice and wisdom aspect of practice. In Tibetan, we divide the entire components of a spiritual path into 2 broad categories: wisdom, not compassion, method, because it has to contain much more than compassion. But in the West, we sometimes call wisdom and compassion. It's easier. But the other basket, if you will, contains much more than wisdom, much more than compassion. So it contains love, compassion. Say in the case of 6 perfections, all the rest of the perfections will be, except for the wisdom, all the rest will be in the method components. So basically, these signs has to do with the strength of their practice along the lines of how strong they are in their method components or in their wisdom components. And particularly in this context of irreversibility, it has to so strongly deal with the strength of their bodhicitta, the strength of their concern for others, because the danger being sensed is that of reverting back into self-centeredness, more particularly self-centered pursuit of one's own liberation. So that's what is being kind of pardon? Yeah, that's what is being refuted. That's what is being feared of, and thus the signs have to do greatly on the strength of their bodhicitta, and on the other hand, that of the understanding of emptiness. Because there's a big connection, very subtle connection, important connection between one's tendency of being self-centered and one's lack of understanding of emptiness, to a great extent. And thus, those 2 are the areas where we look for their strength. So in the case of the wisdom, now coming to your question specifically, in the case of the understanding of in the case of the strength of their wisdom, it has to be seen mostly in their articulation, of the concept of emptiness. How much of an originality they come up with, not just borrowing the words from the text. Of course, that itself, to really sound consistent all along, takes much work. But beyond that, if one has integrated that, then one have to look for consistent sign of richness, flexibility in articulating it in very original terms. That's the sign, verbal sign to look. So that has to be consistent over time. These signs are established by watching over time. Somebody can fake up for one time, 2 times, 3 times, right? But not always. So one has to kind of watch over a period of time. Now coming to the compassion, the wisdom, the method component of the. Again, one looks for a consistent behavior response to a certain situation. In the case of compassion, you look for how that person naturally responds or reacts to a distressful situation. We use, and again, that has to be seen in a consistent way. The expression, the scriptures. In a way, these two expressions seem to be very general in seeing those signs, and the specifics maybe, the details maybe in the specifics. Broadly, when you look at the strength of compassion, one looks at how consistently they relate or respond to a distressful situation. When they come upon people suffering, how do they respond? How easy are they to shed tears? How easily do they get goosebumps? Yeah, it even uses the term goosebumps on their body, and how consistent they are in that kind of a response. Sometimes you can. Have you noticed His Holiness shedding tears from his high throne the moment he mentions Mother Sentient Beings? The moment he calls up sentient beings, maybe through familiarity, practice, kind of right away brings their kindness, their share in just about anything that we pursue, that we so and likewise I saw Senshab Serkong Rinpoche, Senshab Serkong Rinpoche, Venerable's teacher. We were at the dialectic school, and very often this master, who had served as one of the debating partners of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So that would be like someone who assists in his studies, who they themselves would have already finished the studies, and now they are serving as co-studiers, helping. And there will be some who will be formally teaching, who would be considered tutors, but then there will be some appointed based on their achievement in assisting His Holiness in his studies in different fields. He very often speaks of his Mongolian debating partner in the person of Mutup Sonyi, and he says that his interest in emptiness was to a great extent due to him. Likewise, this Sekun Senshe Rinpoche had been one of His Holiness's debating partners, must have been very influential in the cultivation of bodhicitta, compassion aspect, that he was like an embodiment of that. As soon as he mentions His Holiness' name, you could see he would completely change and shed tears We witnessed that several times because we had the opportunity of being in functions of the school where he would be invited to give to address the situation, address the community, as well as some more public functions that he would be attending and asked to speak at the main temple. So on several occasions we got to witness that. Yeah, so those are the signs. Just two of them. Yeah, but that seems to be very general. Maybe there are others, but yeah, there definitely are others. 44 of them. So it'll be good to. Venerable, do we touch on that? Not right.
If someone has had a realization of emptiness, then they're not to show it, or they're not to tell others that they had that realization. Mm-hmm. But I guess somebody observing them would, someone like you, for example, would be able to tell that they have that realization.
Yeah, they kind of can't stop. They can't help but respond in that way. They would definitely try to kind of hide it, whatnot, but
it's just
that's who
overflows.
They are. Yeah, it overflows. Yes. In the case of His Holiness, he would find himself shedding tears, and he would say, "Oh, this is silly what I'm doing." That's all he could do to kind of talk it down, but he can't help but shed tears right into that. But as soon as he finds himself in that, he said, "Ah, this is silly what I'm doing," like that. And there were several occasions when he would stop speaking so that he could contain himself. Yeah, and then and then speak. Yeah, we have seen that. And then, yeah, so that's quite amazing. And also encouraging that, yes, you can get there, provided you make efforts. Yes. Yes, please.
There's a video on the web of His Holiness teaching the Kunilama Kuniyadam verse, and just starting to cry when he was teaching that.
Okay. Yes.
And also, when we had a conference of Western Buddhist teachers with His Holiness back in '93, when Venerable Tenzin Palmo was talking about the situation of Western monastics, His Holiness started to cry. It was really something.
Yeah. The Geshe is under interrogation. Yes, please.
Geshe, I think it was earlier this morning that you mentioned two signs of immortality, and it had to do, what was a gross one, and then what was the subtle?
I meant two signs of mortality, not immortality. Two signs of, okay, we can speak, but two signs of mortality. One, mortality, is that your question? Yeah, could you?
Yeah, so you mentioned the gross one at the gross level, and then I don't recall capturing anything about the subtle level. And you had mentioned something about, here we go, the sense that one could achieve a state of no longer being subject to death due to karma and afflictions.
But still,
and about the four maras. Yeah, you were talking about the four maras.
Yes.
In connection with the supreme nectar. And so one of those maras you said has to do with the immortality. And so there was the talk about the gross one, but I didn't capture one about the subtle one.
Yes, one of these maras is mara of death, and it has to do with mortality, and this can come in two forms. So the mara has to do with mortality, since it is something to be overcome. So mortality is what that mara stands for, one of the maras. And for each of the maras, we speak of gross level and subtle level. Gross level of the mara of death is dying without any sense of control over it, under the force of afflictions and karma. And that could come, as I said, that could come in so many ways. One, timely; another, untimely. Untimely, right? Like that. But nonetheless, under the force of afflictions and karma. So let me expand it a little bit. When we speak of untimely death, that means some certain deaths, even including timely order, but maybe not so much. In the case of untimely death, which means premature death. Oh, premature death. But what would you call the other one? Like, anyway. Okay, anyway, you got the point, right? Because in a way, it's almost like each birth is like, and it's very similar to arrow being flung. Depending on whatever force goes into flinging it, right? It could go only that far and not beyond that. But there's no guarantee that it would go even that far. What if there were to be a tree, a bird, or something that obstructs it, right? Before it loses its force, that would be considered untimely death. But dying we definitely do. So that's within the gross matter of death, right? Okay. So dying under the force of affliction. But then, in the case of those who have eliminated afflictions and are no more subject to afflicted karma, so that means who are no more subject to the karma under the force of afflictions, even they undergo death until they attain full awakening, full Buddhahood. And those kind of death would be to us ordinary beings incomprehensible. The Tibetan term is samjimityaba, something that you cannot easily make sense of or understand what's going on. The literal translation of Tibetan would be unthinkable, unimaginable, but this would be more in line with incomprehensible. The reasons for which is that not that easy to comprehend, but nonetheless subject to death. So that is considered the subtle matter of death. Yes.
What are the other three maras?
I see. Yeah, I begged that, right? I begged that question. I should have said 4 maras. So this is what happens in the interrogation, right? One is the skandha, aggregates. There too we may speak of subtle and gross. And then the other mara is the affliction, klesha, afflictions. And then the third is the Devaputra. Yeah, actual being. Yeah, actual being who takes interest in. It's almost like a mean guy who, for the time being, wants others to just fall in his trap, not get out of it. And this has been identified as not among the humans, but in one of the celestial God realms. Somehow he takes interest in stopping people from outdoing him, in exposing him, like that. So yeah, based on one's pursuit, one's interest, where one kind of thinks lies one's interest or whatnot, then one would guard that blindly, and whoever one sees as opposing that or challenging that would be the target. That's interesting. Oh, something got revealed. But it's interesting. I mean, just as in our human realms, we can see some just predisposed to mean things. Yeah, predisposed to mean things, and right, so and then kind of indulges in it, and whoever tries to kind of mend them, change them, or does anything indirectly kind of challenging him or her, could put up challenges. So in a similar way, someone with very deep, strong, perverted prayer, perverted intention, that could be under the force of that, what do you call, under the force of that intention, could be born due to that, and thus their whole perspective, at least for the time being, would be influenced by that. So in that respect. But then we speak of subtle and gross, which is not that easy to, that I don't have it just at the top of my head. But yeah, we do speak of subtle and gross. So subtle, in the case of the Devaputra, it wouldn't be a subtle being. It would be something else. But the gross would be in the form of a being. And likewise, in the case of afflictions, we speak of gross and subtle. Maybe in the case of subtle afflictions, it may be in the cognitive obscuration field. I don't remember clearly, but yeah, I kept meaning to check what actually this incomprehensible death looks like, and whatnot. But somehow I could not go back. But when I came across it, even in the text that we studied, it only mentions it like that, but doesn't give the detail. But I wanted to look into the details. Yes.
Would that being that you speak of, it's a sentient being, so it still has potential to become Buddha?
Oh yeah.
It's just
That's for the time being. Like someone being very, very rude, right? And just doesn't see the light. Just doesn't see the way out of it. And so that can happen. But nonetheless, it is still his or her afflictions, no matter how deep, strong, it's adventitious. It doesn't make into the very fabric of their mind. It can be, provided one makes effort, can be separated. Yes. Although we identify one God by that name, but that would not always be the same guy. Somebody would replace him. No, we will not. I'm just joking. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be always the same guy. They get replaced. Yes, please. Sorry.
I have two questions, but the first, you mentioned the intention part of bodhicitta, so genuine wish to benefit others in having others reach both nirvana and Buddhahood. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering about, it sounds like a kind of altruism. Mm-hmm. I wondered if there was a tradition that just wanted all others to reach nirvana, and that was their form of altruism. Like, mm-hmm. I don't think the Theravadins necessarily have that, because it would take a sense of not so self-centeredness, mm-hmm. but I didn't know if there was a category like that, or I was just curious.
Although I mentioned that, so yeah, to put it in a very a technical way, we say bodhicitta is accompanied by two aspirations. Accompanied not necessarily simultaneously, but it is accompanied by two aspirations. One comes before bodhicitta, another comes with bodhicitta. Two aspirations. The aspiration that precedes it, that goes before it, is the aspiration to benefit others, and benefit others in either way, either in landing them in the state of liberation or full awakening. And the aspiration that goes with the bodhicitta shares the same focus aspect, etc. Except bodhicitta is considered mind, and this aspiration is a mental factor. And they happen to be concomitant, they happen to be going together, and this other aspiration that is together with the bodhicitta shares in the same object of intent, you can even call, shares in the same object of intent, object of focus as the bodhicitta. So, if I understood your question clearly, someone who may not have developed bodhicitta, right, could as well be concerned about others, right? Is that your question?
For instance, a Theravadan who doesn't believe that anyone besides the Buddha could fully perfect full Buddhahood, yet they believe everyone could reach nirvana, perhaps.
I see. Yes.
And so their altruism is in the sense that of their comprehension of how, the perfection of what all beings could do. So
yes.
It would be selfless, but it wouldn't be bodhicitta.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Is there a category like that? I don't know.
I
I'm just
see.
curious.
Not so much a category. But one thing, even in the Theravada system, even in the Theravada system, which from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective follows in terms of tenet, it follows a certain specific tenet, not Chittamatra and Madhyamika. It falls in terms of their philosophical standing. It falls within either the Vaibhashika or Sautantrika tenet system. So in that tenet system, which I earlier mentioned, the tenet systems are like a gradation that are more or less like a pedestals or rung of ladder to kind of train further into. Although Theravadins may not accept it that way, right? But yeah, they may not. But at the same time, they say that some sentient beings can become Buddha. So they based on certain scripture and their inclination, philosophical position, they accept what we call three final three final vehicles. So three final vehicles, which means the Bodhisattva vehicle is of course counted as one vehicle that some people can go through, but not everyone can go through that. And those who go through the Mahayana, or rather the Bodhisattva vehicle, they would, through the efforts, culminate in Buddhahood. So it wouldn't be just the historical Buddha, others also. Even in their tradition, they speak of I think at Saranath they even have statues around that stupa where they count some 28 Buddhas like that. And likewise, they believe in Buddhas before the present historical ones and those who come. So yeah, there is the possibility. Except the other two vehicles are as final. So there can be some who, due to their prior disposition, enters it. When they enter, either due to their prior disposition or due to circumstance, they enters it. And when they enters it, and then traverse it, they can become arhat, and that's the final. And likewise with the other vehicle, that of the solitary realizer. So because of that standing, they wouldn't necessarily work and accept that everyone can become Buddha, except it is not that easy to tell who will and who will not until they have kind of embarked on a particular path, and they can say someone enters into them. And even with the intention of working for one's own liberation or working for the liberation of someone, in which case, of course, that would have to account for some altruism, some way of concern, and that definitely they have that. Even for the solitary realizers, as solitary realizers as they may be, as very, if you will, kind of very intent on their individual liberation, to the point of wishing that the final life of their liberation, from final life of attaining their liberation, may be such that they didn't have to resort to any other teachers, that they could, from their past practices, be able to kind of what do you call they able to traverse the path. So in the Bodhisattva practice, when we speak of altruism, it is not at all saying that the others do not have any sense of concern about others. They do have, except it is not as strong enough to shoulder the responsibility, if you will, shoulder the responsibility to work for full awakening for the sake of all sentient beings. But nonetheless, we attribute in immeasurable compassion, immeasurable love to the Shravakas, to the solitary realizers. Even the Sravaka, in the solitary realizers, they make a prayer that if during the final life of their attaining liberation requires teaching someone, may they be able to do so without disturbing themselves through gestures, whatnot. So they have that concern, but not, at least from a Bodhisattva point of view, kind of full swing, even ready to sacrifice their awakening for the sake of others if it needs to be. So in that aspect, yeah. Yes. By the way, I should mention from the Chittamatra and from one school of Chittamatra as well as the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, that position of three final vehicles, as although it has scriptural references to that effect, it is considered interpretive teaching, not definitive. So the Chittamatras and the Prasangik Madhyamikas only accept one final vehicle, that everyone has the potential to full awakening. Yes, please.
Geshe, we're so happy that you're not only a Tibetan scholar, but you're also well versed in Western science.
I'm not so well versed.
And so,
Yeah.
in the Pramana Vartika, there's a long discussion about how the sense faculties go from life to life, improving rebirth.
Yeah.
And it seems that Dharmakirti asserts that the immediately preceding condition of the first moment of sense faculties of this life is an abstract composite in seed form from a previous life. And we wondered how that matches up with the concept of DNA.
I see.
Is that something like Mount Meru that we'd have to throw out, or?
Oh, I see. Yeah, actually, right now we have yet to identify what would be the equivalent of the sense faculty in the science. At one time, I was thinking that maybe the cones and rods would be the eye sense faculty, because they are quite subtle, not apparent to the naked eye, except through magnifying microscopes, but not to the naked eye. So that would put those in the category of extremely hidden, extremely subtle to the naked eyes, not no more to the. So now see with the devices, what we consider extremely hidden kind of. Pardon?
Might be manifest.
Yeah, they can manifest, but not to the naked eyes, right? But so they could manifest. So for now, first we have to see how that. In this respect, I even asked I even discussed this with my Geshe buddies, with whom I have WeChat account and my WhatsApp account. Oh, luckily now I have WeChat connection with my teacher. And he's so happy to answer all the questions. When I ask these questions to different Geshes, my teacher, he's in his 80s, 86, 9. He's quite healthy still. He would be the first one to respond. Yeah, really. Yeah, I'm always moved by him. And he would say, he would have so many excuses to say, I'm so inspired by you, still thinking about these things, despite being in the Wild West. in America, when you say Wild West, will be what? The whole of America or California? Just the West? Okay. But when they use this expression in the Asian countries, all of the America will be Wild West. Despite being in the Wild West, you still think of these, and this is so inspiring. Then he would follow it up with his responses like that. So, I brought this particular question to him, but to my Geshe buddies. Because at one point, when I was thinking that maybe the cones and rods might be the eye sense organ, I don't remember clearly whether in the scriptures it's only spoke of one eye sense organ in each of the eyes, or did it ever touch on the number? And when I asked this, I don't recall seeing any number associated with that. And none of those, nor do any of those recall any number attached to that. So that made me kind of think like maybe the rods and cones. Now recently they have added another receptor, right? Another receptor. They have found another receptor, and in the eyes. So it is not just rods corns, but there is another receptor associated with visual, by which they were able to explain some phenomena that they could not understand early on. And they have found that. I have the link to that, not right away. Yeah, I may have read this twice or thrice, and I say, oh, maybe I could wait and see some other receptors, subtler, or maybe that I could identify as. But who knows if they are, because in the way we explain about these sense faculties, we speak of them as very, very, very subtle, yet at the same time being able to reflect images. But as you mentioned, they could go into they could go into seed form, in which case then it could be carried. But it is a little difficult to say how a form could go into a seed form, right? Yeah, how a seed could go into but at the same time, something that we call physical doesn't necessarily have to match up with the Western concept of physical. Yeah, I mean, earlier we spoke of physical in connection with the clear light mind, right? So, yeah, physical, at least non-consciousness, energy kind of a thing. And if it is an energy, then yes, it could come in different forms. It could come back into form, it could change forms. And that's, even science accepts this. So in that case, then it may be possible. So for now, I don't have any clear idea of what that would correspond to. But yeah, I did entertain the idea of maybe it would corn, rod, but now there is a third one. And that's the reason why I checked about the number. So no clear, yeah. Yes, please.
This may not be connected because I'm not very knowledgeable about the sense faculties, but when you talk about rods and cones, you know, they're just the receivers of the stimuli.
Yeah.
Well, people can be what they call cortically blind, which means that all of that receptors are functioning perfectly.
Yes.
But nothing happens in the brain.
Yes.
So that there's no capacity to label it.
Yeah. Capacity to perceive it.
Perceive it.
Yes. I have an explanation on that.
And that's true of all of the sense faculties.
Yes.
So I'm only bringing that up in relationship to your statement about the DNA.
Yeah.
And it's particularly prevalent with children with fetal alcohol effects. It's one of the deficits of fetal alcohol effects. And severe malnutrition when things don't myelinate.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of stuff. So another reason to feed the world. But I just was curious about that distinction, if it had any impact in the question.
Yeah, that phenomena of what they call, I think, blind sight. They call that blind sight, I think. That one is blind in one sense of not being able to perceive phenomena, yet at the same time they could navigate their movement through the things without bumping into things. Yeah, but they cannot label them, they cannot perceive them. I kind of, when I came across that, I kind of was intrigued by it. And I kind of think that maybe that's an area where scientists, whether science could draw the distinction between mental and sensory consciousness. Even in the Tibetan Buddhist understanding, sensory consciousness are, what would be the term? Kukpa. They are dumb. Dumb in the sense of not being able to identify things. They only see, hear, but not really able to say, this is what I heard. Right? So they're dumb in that. Whereas mind is not dumb in that. They are able to perceive, label things. So the cortical part of that, because we are embodied beings, And our mind at the gross level has to work through our mind, through our body, through the body mechanism. That's how we are embodied. Now, that doesn't mean that the mind cannot separate from it. When it does, that is no more embodied in the usual sense, and doesn't necessarily have to depend on the sensory faculties or whatnot. There are so many incidents happening in the operation theater, right, where people seem to have kind of hovered over themselves and then see things, and that they recall and come. So those are cases of not being embodied in that particular, not embodied in the strict, in the usual sense. Of course, it would have to have that physical component, but not embodied in the gross sense of having to depend on them. So I was thinking that maybe that's an area to look deeper into, making the distinction between mental mind and sensory mind. Right now, science doesn't make distinction between sensory mind and mental mind. Within that, conceptual mental mind and non-conceptual direct mental mind, they do not make distinction. Yeah, that caught my attention. That's it depends on the cortex. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that there's a connection between one's tendency of being self-centered and the lack of understanding of emptiness. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. And then, because our hats have realized emptiness, but we say that they're self-centered in one way and that they've put their own nirvana before that of others. So you like, what type of self-centeredness are you talking about? And
self-centered attitude is a very broad category. So there may be intent on that self-centeredness, on that self-centered pursuit of their achievement, but not as much on others. They will be practicing other practices like generosity, patience, morality, all of those, and would be so respectful of others in kind of not encroaching into their rights and whatnot. But you are right that in that the arhats, they pursue their path to the culmination of leading, achieving liberation with that core wish in them. So theirs is a little different, I think, because as much as they are intent on that, they see that understanding emptiness or dealing with the afflictions is the way to achieve it. And the way to do that in a very thorough way would be by understanding emptiness. So I think there's is an exception, I think. But in general, when we give in to kind of thinking me like that, we would be buying into an intrinsic an intrinsic concept. And because we are not so much worried about the afflictions so much, right? If our attention is to overcome the afflictions, then that will have to additionally bring our attention to exploring the nature of things, and that may kind of change the equation, I think. But self-centeredness is very broad. It can come in so many much grosser forms as well. Okay, it is time, right?